I think we navigate and we cope with our lack of confidence by pretending like we have more of it.
Hello Sales Nation, I'm Will Barron and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman podcast. On today's show we have the legend that is Bill Caskey. He is the co-host of the Advanced Selling podcast and he's a sales expert and consultant as well. On today's show we're diving into sales confidence and selling confidence, what it is and how we can acquire more of it. Super fascinating show. Find out more about Bill over at billcaskey.com. And with all that said, let's jump into today's episode. Hey, Bill, and welcome to the Salesman podcast.
Well, awesome to be here, buddy.
I'm glad to have you on, mate. We just had some good back and forth for clip record there, which I appreciate. And today we're going to talk about confidence. And before we dive into what it is, how we can measure it, how we can implement it, how we can improve our self-confidence and how that relates to sales, business, and life in general, I want you to do some painting in the minds of our audience. I want you to give them a real vivid visualization of what's going on, if you were observing it, of when there's a buyer and they're sat physically opposite someone, and whether they've started pitching or whether they're adding value or building rapport, whatever the case is, but the seller that they're sat opposite, what's going on there when they are unconfident? Is that the right word? Is that a word? Unconfident, inconfident?
I think that's the right. I mean, it's a word that we all use, and it's a word that seems to be an attribute that we're all striving for. And when a hiring manager hires a sales professional, I think that's what they're looking for someone who's not cocky, but who's confident in themselves, in their own skin. So I like the word. I think it's a good word. But before I start, I want to tip my hat. I don't know if that's a proper English or not, but I want to tip my hat to you. You've done an awesome job on this podcast. And as a fellow podcaster, we publish the Advanced Selling podcast every week. I know it's not easy to do. And you've been consistent. You've been awesome. So before we start, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate the work that goes into what you're doing, and keep it up. It's a great service. There's probably 35, 40 million salespeople, across in the free world. And so there's plenty of space for 2 or 3 podcasts.
Oh, for sure.
And we will definitely promote this on our show as well. So anyway, just tip of the hat to you on that.
I appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you, Bill.
No problem. So yeah, I think, real quickly, my story, I don't know that I was a very confident kid growing up. I think I was very self-conscious. Why I got into sales, I have no idea. But everybody, when I graduated from college, said, hey, you're not going to law school, you're not going to get your MBA. Why don't you get into sales? So I said, well, okay. But I didn't know what I was getting in for. And I didn't realize how much confidence really plays a role in this profession. And so over the last 15, 20 years, I've really focused a lot on what I call the inner game, the mental side of selling. I'd like to divide the two up between the mental side and the mechanical side. And I think lots of people teach the mechanics, not too many people teach the mental. And so that's what I think we're going to talk about today. I think the way I would describe it when it's not there is there's an anxiousness on the part of the salesperson when they sit in front of a prospect. There's the voices in their head that roll like, okay, he just said that. What am I going to say? How am I going to handle that? What if he talks about price? How am I going to handle it? There's all this voice that happens. And I think that voice has to be quieted because I was listening to a podcast the other day with a guy named Ben Crane. He's a professional golfer, and he was telling the host about the process he goes through when he prepares for a golf. He's a pro, so he's on the tour, and he talked about meditation. He talked about working out. He talked about planning, and he said to the host, he said, when I look over that putt and it's a 10-foot putt and I've got to hit it, I am striving for one thing, a quiet mind. That's all I'm interested in because I've hit that putt 1,000 times, but it's my mind that gets in the way. And I think it's the same in sales. We're sitting in front of somebody, especially if it's a big deal or there's added pressure, and we start talking to ourselves. And we've got to have a quiet mind when we're in front of prospects. So edginess, anxiety, awkwardness, getting up inside your own head, and then you stop listening. So I think all those things are casualties of not having good confidence. What do you think? I mean, you talk to a lot of people, and you're a salesperson. What do you think about confidence?
Well, I'll tell you what I think, but just pre that, when I visualized that, so this is interesting. I didn't think about that scenario from the side of the salesperson. I thought about it. I mean, maybe my kind of like empathy is high for the buyer because I see both sides of the coin now that I'm doing the show versus just selling from my medical device days. And for the buyer, it's the weirdest, horrible scenario of all time to know that subconsciously you don't. They're verbally telling you that they know what they're on about, that the salesperson is. They're telling you that they know the product, that the product is best in the market, that there's a fit with your needs. But when you're looking at them, you're getting this weird vibe of, I don't think there's something weird with it. So that's what I visualized when I put those two in like kind of like my mind's eye and that. But confidence, my take on it was the traditional take, which again, you just turned on its head, which is good. I always assumed, especially when I was younger, and I fell into this trap of, and you mentioned this earlier on, of going down this slightly cocky route of, and it wasn't that I was confident, it was I was trying to fake the confidence. And so I wasn't congruent in it, and so it came across as cocky. And I wasn't trying to be an arsehole by any means. I was trying to do the right thing. I knew that the mentors that I had in the world of sales in the organization, the top sales reps in the medical device companies that I looked up to, they were intrinsically confident. Also, I thought, in hindsight, perhaps less so.
They aren't. They weren't. But
in hindsight, yeah.
Yeah, the bluster you talk about and that persona that, the loud talking salesperson none of us like, but sometimes I work with a lot of engineers and what I would call non-sales professionals, and they know what they don't like, but then when they go out to sell, they do the exact same thing because that's all they know. And so I think we navigate and we cope with our lack of confidence by pretending like we have more of it, which is kind of weird, but it's a coping mechanism, this bluster and this persona. So I love that. I think you're exactly right.
And I want to come back to what you said here about the quiet mind, because this is, and I've never put these two together, so I thank you for this, but that is the exact opposite of being this cocky, funny, like the stereotype of the used car salesperson that we all, perhaps we all occasionally fall into it in our kind of like formative years as sales professionals. But being the quiet-minded individual, the one who is there for the person that you're sat in front of, which is increasingly rare in the world of business and just life in general. Clearly, that's an opportunity to add value in itself. Never mind this conversation of confidence. But I've never looked at it this way before, and I think you're dead on. That if you are super confident, you should have the ability to make a statement, ask a question, give an insight, and then be quiet and wait for the response, because in your heart, in yourself, that what you've asked is the right thing to ask. I've never looked at it this way before, which is brilliant.
Yeah, and I think you brought up the customer's point of view too. And, we all say that we're here for the customer. And we all say that we're into customer service. And, the customer is important and their needs are important. But that's not really what we demonstrate. Because if we are not confident in ourselves, I mean, what bigger favor could you do for your customer than to be confident? Because they're getting ready to invest money with you and go down a path with you, and you be the guide along that path. Don't you want your guide to be confident? You don't want your guide on a mountain trip to be saying, you know what, I don't know if we can do that or not. Well, maybe let's go ahead, let's try. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. So I think being a guide in the sales process demands that you work on yourself and especially on your mental state, which includes confidence.
Let me ask you this then, Bill, and we'll come back to what confidence kind of like is, if we can define it, and how we can implement it and measure it in a second. But I want to like leverage your experience in the world of sales here. Is this the way that sales should have always have been? Because it seems to be this kind of conversation seems to be rife and popular at the moment. Is it something that sales should have always had been, or has sales changed through the internet, social media, the way people engage, the ability to like buy from anywhere in the world, giving buyers options to not have to deal with that cocky idiot salesperson? Has sales changed? Has the market changed, which is pushing more of this, or should it have been this way all along?
Well, for the last 20 years, we've been teaching it, but I do think it's changed. I think their BS detector is up a little stronger. They've got it dialed in. We're all into authentic relationships. I don't know if we are, but we say we are. And so anytime there is authenticity on the part of the sales professional, I think it commands authenticity on the part of the buyer. And we all want our buyers to tell the truth, but we don't always tell the truth. Well, how do you expect the person in front of you to behave properly if you're not behaving properly? And this gets back to what you brought up at the very beginning, which is, what does the buyer think of your confidence or lack of, and how is that seen by them? And I think it's huge, but I think it's becoming more of an issue. I really do. I think it's becoming huge. And when someone reaches out for information, they don't want to be sold. They want to be informed. They want to be educated. They want to be brought along. They don't want to be sold to. So that's my take on it. I don't know if that's right, but that's my take. And I work with a fair amount of companies and a lot of individuals, and this message really resonates with them. It really resonates.
Well, let me ask you this then, because this is probably a better way of asking that question. Is it resonating more now than it did 10 years ago? Is this sell for the consulting and all the rest of it to talk about these and to build these skills into the sales teams that you deal with and the management and the leadership? Is it an easier sell for you now than it was 10 years ago?
Yes, flatly yes. And you know what? I think I was in a group down in Houston here a few weeks ago, and one of the guys stood up, and he was a 5-year sales guy, and he was in the middle of the pack, stack ranked. And he got up and said, look, we need to go in and we need to really prove to these customers that we're the right fit and all that. And the owner of the company, he's a investment capital guy, but he was in the room, CEO, and he raised his hand. He stands up. He goes, why are we doing this? Why are you doing that this way? We have awesome products. We have lots of prospects. We have great clients. Why are we begging for anything? Stop the begging. Why are we trying to prove ourselves? And it was great because it reinforced my point. He didn't know it at the time, but I think that the senior level people see it, but yet the rank and file salespeople still think their job is to convince and persuade and defend and beg, and I just don't think it works.
For sure, totally agree. So let's get practical here, Bill. I want the audience to take something away from this. How do we? And I don't know if there's an answer to the question. Genuinely, how do we know if we are full of fake confidence, if we are cocky and we're inadvertently annoying people with our presence? How do we know if we are not confident enough at all and we come across like this horrible drip of a mess who just sucks value from the conversation and people don't want to be around? Because obviously there's a balance between all of this. How do we know where we stand with it?
I think it's very hard to know. I think that requires a great deal of self-awareness. I was doing a program a few weeks ago, and I audio recorded the people giving their 3 to 5 minute pitch in front of a group. And by pitch, I don't mean, well, yeah, that's what it was. And they don't even know they're doing it. So we would play the recordings back, and they would be ashamed at how needy they sounded. But when they're doing it, they didn't think anything of it because it's just the way they do it. And then when they sit back and listen to it, they're like, "Who did I say? I didn't say that. Did you put that in there?" No, that's exactly what you said. So I think self-awareness is a big problem. So I'd say video record yourself, audio record yourself doing something, then go back and listen. And maybe you do it great. And then you'll say, awesome, I got this nailed. So I think that's one way to become more self-aware, is just listen to yourself after the fact, not when you're talking.
For sure. I've got a little tale on this that I've shared on the show before. This is in the medical device days. I was presenting over a couple of days the same presentation, and it was teaching surgeons how to use these endoscopy tools in a certain way that was, how to put it, it wasn't the way they were supposed to be used, but it was super effective for the job that they were doing. So there was loads of value for them. And on the first day, I got my phone and just the company iPhone and just videoed the presentation. And immediately I'm 6'3". I don't have the best posture anyway. But I don't know whether it was because it was the first presentation of a series of them. I don't know whether it was I was just not in the right frame of mind. I hadn't got myself going in the morning before I did the presentation. But I was like hunched over, and it was subtle. It was like, if for everyone watching on YouTube now, it was kind of just shoulders rolled a little bit forward, and it looked like I was totally disinterested, and I was not confident on what I was saying. I did not look like an expert on the metaphorical stage that I was in front of these, and they were important surgeons. The consultants that flew in from all over the world to go through this training course, and I was the first part of it. And this shocked me because I was confident. I knew what I was talking about. I believed in it. I'd been in over about 50, 60 cases using the equipment in this particular way with one of the best colorectal surgeons in the world at this point. When I was explaining it, I was using slideshows from slides with pictures from the surgeries that I'd been involved in. I'm literally in the pictures, kind of like a foot away from the patient. And it gave the appearance of a lack of confidence. So the next one, all I did was roll my shoulders back, smiled a bit more. Yeah. And the engagement, which is what was interesting to me, which was obviously measurable, was that the audience actually cared. The first time around, you got the occasional person on the phone, or they're looking around the room, this kind of thing. Exactly the same presentation, exactly the same words. The second time around, with a little bit of body language change. And I don't know whether that makes you change as an individual. I don't know if there's some kind of like feedback loop between how your body is and how you project and things like that. But it made such a difference. So this is what I want to go on to now, of how much of this is the inner game of believing that you are confident versus some of the outer game and some of the tactics of, we know we should stand up straight, we know we should have open body language and things like that.
Well, I think it's both. It's not the answer you wanted maybe, but I think I always say that there's two elements to our competencies. There's the backstage element and the front stage element. And the backstage element is, are you properly prepared? Do you really understand your value? All those things that we're going to talk a little bit about today. But then there's a front stage, which is literally you were on stage and you were in front of people. And even like you said, the difference between this and this is 2 inches, mm-hmm. But we always talk about the game of inches. You just coined it. It's the game of inches. And you had a very different reaction when you paid attention to your posture, your tone, your physicality. I went to I don't know if you're familiar with Bo Eason. Bo is a guy out in California who teaches speakers how to command the stage. And I'm 6'5", pretty tall guy, and a little overweight, but not too bad. But when I was doing my presentations, my arms were going like this. I don't know if you can see, but I was literally within myself. He said, Bill, you act like you're in a barrel. You're presenting like you're in a barrel. You're 6'5". The stage is 30 feet wide. Get out there and move and be who you are, be all of who you are. And I think sometimes when we get in front of people, we come in on ourselves and we protect, because it's like 50 eyes are looking at us. Ooh, this could be dangerous. We're going to protect ourselves. And it's really the opposite that we should be doing. We should be commanding the room instead of standing behind a podium making very small gestures. And it's exactly what happened. You adjusted and everything changed.
and this goes too far as well, because I know one sales rep in the last company I was with, he was successful. He was always higher up on the leaderboard than me, but he would go this one step further. And I assume, I'm thinking this doesn't work for women, but I know men that do it. He would sit slightly like too casual and too relaxed back with his legs wide open in front of, like, hands on hips, kind of in front of customers of, I'm the boss here. And that put a lot of the nursing staff that he dealt with, it got their backs up. The surgeons, especially the male surgeons, were fine with it. There's that stereotype of the alpha surgeon, and as long as they weren't clashing heads, it was probably. I don't know if I never talked to him about it. It'd be a weird conversation of, why do you sit with your legs so wide open in front of everyone?
Yeah,
but
you're offending me.
Yeah, it was. I don't know whether he was doing it on purpose, whether it was a weird tactic that he thought that it makes me look like the stronger bloke in the conversation. I don't know what it was.
Probably not.
But it would definitely put the women's backs up, and I'd had kind of like conversations with them on the back end of things of. They thought he was arrogant, and it came down to how he would sit and how he would slob around when he was doing teaching and things of that nature. So there's what I'm trying to get at. I think there's a balance between kind of overconfidence and underconfidence, and that's what I want to get across on the show today. So
I always feel like when you're focused, and I'll just say this one thing and then turn it back to you. I think when you're focused on yourself, then that confidence becomes a bigger issue. If you're focused on how can I bring value to this group that I'm in front of, and how can I really bring my best game so that they benefit from it, I think then your confidence is not an issue, because you're more concerned with them getting what they want rather than me and how I look and getting what I want. So And that goes for whether it's in front of a group or one-to-one, is I want people to be totally immersed in what the customer is saying and forget about what they're going to get out of something. And that's not the way it usually starts, but that's my training and coaching, and I think it helps people.
So that's what I wanted to move on to. How do we become more confident? Because I'm very aware that some people might be able to sit there if they are like a super alpha individual, like male or female, if they're congruent with how they are sat and their confidence and the way that they speak along that nature, it might not work. It might annoy people, but people like that authenticity. They know that they're not being like manipulated if that's just the way the person is. Same if someone's a bit softer and a bit fairer. I know people who've gone from like software engineer background into sales, and they're dealing with other software engineers that have gone into procurement, so they can have that deep level conversation, and there's less of this posturing and all these weird manipulation tactics that some salespeople try to employ. So I think congruency is important in all of this. But with that said, Bill, how do you go about within your training getting people to not look more confident, but be more confident?
Yeah, instead of just faking it. Well, I've got a few bullet points here. In fact, I'm going to convert this to a PDF and I'll send it to you, and you can put it in the show notes if you'd like, because I don't know that we'll go through each one of these in dramatic detail, but there's a few here that I think stand out. I just call this the quick confidence checklist. And it's not designed, even though I call it a quick confidence, it's really just a checkout for you to see if you have these things. Number one, I think, is a sound strategy. And strategy to me is, how are you going to get from where you are to where you want to be? And strategy is the how to get there. Most of us are pretty decent at goal setting. We're here today, we want to be here tomorrow. What we're not very good at is how. What's the plan to get there? And I think if every sales professional listening has a end game, has a plan for getting to where they want to go. Let's just say they want to double their income in the next year. And this is a personal goal. It's not a prospect goal. Personal goal. Do you have a sound strategy? Because if you have a sound strategy, no one deal means that much. If you don't have a sound strategy, every deal takes on an enormous amount of burden for you, and you can't lose it. And then you get attached, and then you get frantic, and then you get edgy, and then you stop listening. So even though you might say, well, what's sound strategy have to do with confidence? If you know you have a game plan for accomplishing what you want to accomplish, everything gets easier. Everything gets easier. So that's number one, is what is your strategy of getting you from where you are to where you want to be? Don't you find that a lot of times is that people pretty decent at goal setting, pretty terrible at goal planning and understanding how?
I think this also ties into not having a full enough pipeline. You get the same effect of, you feel like you've got to close every single deal, and then paradoxically you close less of them because you're desperate, and it's a bit of a weird conversation, and it's almost the same as being unconfident. You're faking confidence to cover a need. Again, it's this idea of congruence. You're not being congruent in that you are really there for the prospect, and it's kind of two separate reasons why, but the same end effect.
So that's number one. Number two, and this is a little bit harder, number two here, but it's no attachment. No attachment to the end result. And I wrote a book about 8 or 10 years ago called Same Game, New Rules. And in there I talk about this fundamental shift that has to happen in your mind for you to be a sales professional of the future. And I think the amateur salesperson is always attached to every deal, just like you just said. I want you to be unattached, non-attached, detached, however you want to say it. What I don't want you to do is be disengaged. I don't want you to be disengaged and, as I say, sit in bed all day and eat chocolates until the phone rings. That's disengaged. Nor do I want you to act like you don't care. We do care. What we can't care more about is the sale. If our desire to make the sale supersedes and outruns the prospect's desire to get their problem solved, we're out of control. We're totally out of control, and we're powerless. And then that's when we become we lack confidence. So non-attachment.
Let's stop on this. Sorry, just before you move on to the next one, because I think this is there could be a whole show in itself on this topic. So what you just described makes total sense. I think everyone listening now, all the B2B sales professionals, they're like 15 to 20,000 people that download this episode, they're all going, yes, that makes total sense. But it's quite physiological. Oh God, I can't speak today. fill me in with the word here, Bill.
The philosophy?
It's a philosophy term. It's a philosophy way of like looking at it, as opposed to a real practical, and there might not be a step-by-step guide to becoming less outcome dependent. But how can someone listening to this now, how can they implement that? How is there a strategy to put this in place?
Yes, and hopefully what you'll hear in the next points all lead to that. So if you have a sound strategy and you really believe in it, and you know that you have a game plan of taking your goals and making them happen, you will naturally become more detached. It's just a natural occurrence, because every one deal is not going to mean, life and death to you. So these 7 things that I have all lead to this idea of detachment. I don't think you just automatically switch off attachment. I think you have to do some things to get there. And that's what these will do. And number 1 is a sound strategy. Number 2, I just want you to be thinking about being detached. It is of all the people I've trained, this and the lessons that they say they've learned, this is probably the number 1, is when I feel, and I think we just kind of happen on attachment. I don't think anybody teaches us how to be attached. So you have to teach people how to be detached. It's really not that difficult. But that's one thing I think you should keep in your mind as I go through these. Number 3 is awesome preparation and practice. I was with a group a few months ago, and they were a group of engineers who were now making presentations. And they didn't make them all the time, but 4 or 5 times a year, they'd be called out to do a presentation in front of a group of 4 or 5 buyers or their technical people. And I said to them, they were in a group one day, I said, well, how much do you practice on this? Well, I went through it, a couple months ago, but I know my stuff. I know my stuff, so I just go do it. I said, so you're in front of this group for 2 hours and you don't practice it? No, not really. Yeah, I kind of know my stuff. I think that's awful. And by practicing, they don't need to practice the technical stuff. They need to practice the transitions. What are they going to say on the slide? They need to sit in front of 4 other people who watch them do it, and the other 4 people witness it and give them feedback. We're just terrible at practicing. And salespeople are the same way. And in this group that I run a mastermind group, and we're forever practicing. Okay, Will, you got this call. You're going to do this. Let's hear it. I'm the prospect. Let's go. Let's role play it and let's practice it. And when you start practicing, you realize you don't know what you think you know, and it doesn't come out very smooth. So I think prepare and practice is a great way to become confident, because then when you get in front of the prospect, you've been there before. You've role played it. They're not going to throw you a curveball. So therefore, you're more present. The movie isn't running in your mind, and the mind is quieter.
Sure, makes total sense.
Number 4 is, I think you've got to bring value to people before you sell them. Gary Vaynerchuk wrote the book, A Jab, 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 Right Hook. And that was his whole premise. Jab, meaning bring value, bring value, bring value, and then ask for an appointment, or then ask for the order, or however you would do it. And I think salespeople are pretty bad at this generally. I don't think we think about value as something that we can bring until we make the sale. Well, you can bring value before you make the sale. I mean, your podcast, Will, brings a lot of value to people, and the people on it bring value to people. So I think we've got to get better at saying, well, what can we bring of value? Can we write an article? Can we, and I'm not talking about just sending articles that are already online. Well, what can you do personal value to that person? When you do, you're positioned differently, which is my next one. You've got to think about, how are you positioned when you get there? Do you look and act like every other salesperson that walks through the door? Because if you do, you'll be treated like that. And I don't want you to be treated. You're better than that. You don't deserve to be treated like every amateur salesperson. So how you are positioning yourself, one way to do that is to be a resource. Is doing something that you've written or you've produced and say, here, Doc, here, I did this. I wrote this article. I thought you might like to see it. Now you're not a salesperson anymore unless you start acting like one. You are actually bringing value to that person, and that's how you position yourself. Do you want me to go through these other 2, and then you can come back and ask me questions?
I'm writing notes down here myself
to
go back over a couple of these things.
I don't want to dominate.
No, you go for it. Go for it.
So that's number 5. The 6th thing is, I want you to be skeptical. We were taught early and wrongly that salespeople need to be enthusiastic. I don't buy that. I don't think you should be enthusiastic because your enthusiasm can sometimes suck the air out of the room. And I want the customer to be enthusiastic about their issues, about solving their issues, about your solution. There's no space in the sales process for you to be enthusiastic. Instead, I want you to be skeptical. Now, what are you skeptical of? Well, I'm always skeptical of, is the customer really going to spend the money for something like this? Do they really have a problem that's worth solving? I'm skeptical about people being even able to tell me what their problem is. So I enter every sales process as a skeptic. Now, I'm not verbally a skeptic. Oh, you're not going to buy this, are you? I'm not doing that, but I'm skeptical. What that does, dirty little secret here, what that does is it opens up space for the customer to be okay and to tell you what's really happening. If I'm too eager and I'm taking up all that space between the prospect and I, it doesn't leave any room for the prospect. So be skeptical, have patience. I always feel like if you want to sell something quicker, sell something slower. If you want to get the result quicker, slow the hell down. Don't try to pounce on every word or every sentence the prospect says. Don't try to close them. It'll close faster if you stop closing, because what it allows, it's the ultimate paradox. What it allows is the customer to buy. And then the seventh thing is have high intent. And high intent is one of my fundamental shifts that I think are important. High intent is, what is your intent when you get in front of the prospect? And a lot of times your intent is low intent, which is it's all about me. And if I ask 10 salespeople, I say, well, what's your intent? You're going out to have a call today. What's your intent? Well, my intent's to get to the second call, or my intent's to do a proposal, or my intent's to sell. Wrong intent. Wrong. Terrible intent. That intent's all about you. It's not about them. So your intention has to be focused on, how can I bring value today to this person, whether they buy or not? I always say, forget about the buying thing. Whether they buy or not, how can you be a gift in their life today because you showed up? And they will reciprocate accordingly, and that reduces all the fear for you because your intent is not wrapped around you, it's wrapped around them.
Could a lot of this be summed up in, and I don't want to oversimplify things, but could a lot of it be summed up in, you should just do the right thing, and then good things will come off on the back of that. If you do the right thing often enough with the right people, and clearly there's loads of hustling to be able to do that, and you might not close business up the front, and it might be longer term deals that come in off the back of it, or introductions and all this, the stuff that we all strive for, of referrals and networks and becoming an expert in the industry and being known within your little niche within your products are being sold. Does it come down to just doing the right thing for the customer over and over and over?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, you've simplified it. I think, guys like me don't get paid money just to say do the right thing. So I got to come up with all these elaborate schemes. No, I'm just kidding. But I think you've got to put it into a framework so that people know what does that mean? And that's hopefully what we've done here. But yeah, I think it's a lot of, we live in a 30-day and a 90-day cycle. And a lot of our pay and quotas that are all based on, it's the end of the month. If you've ever worked in technology, it's the end of the month, the end of the month, the end of the month. Oh, we got 5 days left in the month. And I think it's awful because your customer doesn't care about your end of the month. Is this
so I see this changing, and tell me, you're the expert here, not me. Let me pitch you on this idea, and then you can tell me if I'm talking absolute nonsense or if there's something to it. I see this end of the month cycle changing as more businesses move to this SaaS model, as they move to this monthly model, which clearly there's revenue implications for the organization, the corporation, by doing that makes them more sustainable over the longer term. Do you think that sales is going to change and shift from this used car dealership, kind of like forcing pictures down people's throats and cold calling over and over and over and cold email over and over and over to get that 1% of responders, to more account management and more making people happy and happy is the wrong word, making business outcomes continue to be successful over the longer term? Do you think sales is going to shift towards that direction over the next decade?
It might, but even in the SaaS model, I work with some software as service people, and it's still a monthly thing, and I'm having trouble getting the VPs of sales because that's just how they've always done it in technology world. So is it going to change? Yeah, but probably not in my lifetime. I mean,
Interesting.
it's
So
just
let me ask you
because
this then, Bill. Is it, even though we want to do the right thing, we want to be congruent, we want our customers to be happy, we want to add value to them. It makes our job as salespeople a nice job to have. But on the business end of it then, if the businesses want to be slow to react to this and slow to react to the potential market shifts of shifting towards this different approach, does it just make more sense from a dime and cent and pound and pence perspective to continue doing the things that we're doing? I don't know if there's ever been any studies of like the empathetic salesperson versus the hard closer or anything like that. But from a business perspective, which it all comes back to this of pleasing the shareholders and that kind of thing, does it make business sense to be an arsehole salesperson?
You mean to be a 30-day salesperson?
Yeah, to be pushing and heavy and not thinking long term.
Well, I think what it does do is it gives you something to shoot for. So my daughter is 22. She's with an organization that sells email analytics to large list owners. And she is the front end of that. And her goal is to pass 20 leads a month to her senior sales rep. So she's getting inbound calls, webinars, she's outbound calling. So for her, yeah, that's a goal. I mean, it's 20. But what I have cautioned her on, I probably got to be careful because she's got a boss that probably says the opposite of what I say. But I say, it's great to have a goal. But at the end of the month, if you're 5 short, don't go pounding people for something because it's just going to turn into nothing, because all this is just a lead that you need to make your quota. So I like goals. I don't think there's anything wrong with having 30-day, 90-day goals until you start to infringe on the customer because you have a goal. To hell with their goal. And now I do think that if you're in the business of B2B sales, you need to have a process. You need to have a sales process, and the sales process can't go on forever. So if I've got a 30-day process and I start a process the 1st of March, and now it's the end of March and the customer hasn't done anything, then I'm probably going to say, you know what, I think we're done. Sorry, it didn't work out, and I got to move on. So that's sometimes a way to get some action, is if they feel like they're going to lose you. Mm-hmm. But I don't do it as a sales move. I do it because I have a 30-day process or a 90-day process or whatever. So I would let the process drive that more than the day of the month.
Makes total sense. I appreciate that insight. That's a high-level insight, which I think will have practical implications for the audience. And with that, Bill, I've got one question to ask everyone that comes on the show. So I'm going to throw this at you, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
I think the first thing I think about is, just relax, just chill, just don't be afraid. It's all going to work out. And I've heard this same question asked before, and I've heard that. It's just, when you're 22, 25, you think, oh my God, I got to get busy. I got ambition, and, I got to do. Sometimes it's nice just to chill. Everything will work out. And when you're in the state of mind of being afraid, of being on the treadmill, of being anxious, I don't think you do your best work. So then when you get in front of a prospect, I think that you're still in that, I call it inner churn. That stomach is constantly churning about, is this going to work? Is this going to happen? What's my next call look like? Sometimes just chill the hell out. Just relax a little bit. Let things come to you. Great football coaches will say, well, I have a strategy, but it all depends on what the defense shows us. If they show us something that I'm not ready for, then we're going to have to change our strategy. And I think that's, what is the market showing you? And I think when we can do it that way and just allow things to come to us, you still got to get out of bed, you still got to do the behavior, but this constant churn, I don't think is good for us emotionally or financially.
I love it. So I prompted you on the question that I was going to ask, but I didn't prompt you in any way to direct you on the answer. And what you just described, this idea of it's going to be all right, especially in the world of business. It's different if it's your family or your friends' health, which is we're talking about perhaps. But in the world of business, in the world of sales, in the world of taking these small risks, as I know a lot of entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs listen to the show as well, that is my philosophy, and it's an ongoing and it's a common theme on the show. And I don't know whether it's something that I'm picking up. I don't know, because I'm thinking about it. I don't know if it's
could be. You could be.
I don't know if there's some kind of subconscious thing going on in my brain, but this idea of it's going to be okay is something that I'm really hot on at the moment. And I like to look at it as, if you look back at this moment that you're stressed about in 5 years' time,
you don't even remember.
Probably, yeah, you don't even remember it exists. Yet in the moment, you're like, you're doing crazy things to your body with adrenaline and stress and all the hormones that are being secreted, and it's just not good for you. So this everything is going to be all right. I really appreciate that, and I'm glad you came up with it there. And Bill, with that, mate, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Advanced Selling Podcast, your website where we can find out more about you, and yeah, I know the audience are going to get a lot out of just our content today, but all the content you've created over the years as well.
Well, I appreciate it. The Advanced Selling Podcast is our podcast, and it's less of an interview podcast and more Brian Neal, my co-host, and I. We give advice. We dispense counsel and coaching based on the experiences that we have with our clients. It's weekly. You can find it on iTunes, advancedsellingpodcast.com. Also, you can find out more about some of my writings and work at Bill Caskey, Caskey, BillCaskey.com, and there's a link to the Advanced Selling Podcast and another new podcast that I just started here a month ago or so. So that's probably the best place to send people, but lots of free resources there, and I think you'll enjoy maybe reading a little bit deeper about some of these items that we talked about today.
For sure. Well, I'll link to a couple of things from the site in the show notes for this episode. We'll include everything else that we talked about in the show notes. And with that, Bill, mate, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your insights. I want to thank you for going back and forth on a lot of this as well, because I appreciate I just threw a lot at you, and you kind of like put it together, put a structure to it, and give it back to me very nicely so I could comprehend it. So I'm sure that's useful for the audience as well. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you, Will. Keep doing what you're doing, man. You're doing a great job, and I really respect the work you do, and just keep it up, and hopefully we can do this again. Love to have you on our podcast at some point if the spirit moves you and you're open to that, but let's try to do that.